Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell. It's May 8th, 2014. We're in the year beyond Thunderdome, and I want to get right to it. Three stories today, and we're watching these stories as kind of a continuing development of things I've been predicting that would happen. So they're sort of confirmation, but first, all those that sent me articles about the creation of new DNA. I'm planning a blog about that. I wanted to talk about it on today's News and Views, but I thought these stories should get precedence. And besides, what I have to say about the creation of these two new proteins in DNA coding is so out there, so harebrained that I figure I better put it in written form so that it's on the record. All right, today we have news about the BRICSA nations. And the first article is entitled BRICS Creating Parallel Monetary Fund Disillusioned with the IMF and the World Bank. And this is a story that's being carried by the voice of Russia, so take that for what it's worth. But I want you to listen very carefully to this article. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are fed up with the U.S. failure to ratify a 4-year-old agreement aimed at reforming the IMF system. Thus, the post-war consensus on financing bodies appear to be breaking down, writes the expert in his RT op-ed, BRICS Building Parallel IMF. The US and Europe have maintained a stranglehold on the IMF World Bank C-suite, not only in the face of massive Eastern Renaissance, but also with a certain degree of abject hypocrisy, given the abysmal financial management of spendthrift U.S. governments for decades, let alone the travesty of recent recent European economic governance. And the article toward the end states this. I want you to listen very carefully. Having a weak Europe with ambitions for higher political office makes a mockery of the idea of the International Monetary Fund, and that it's anything more than an overdraft facility to be rigged in favor of perceived Western political interests. And that's quite true. What they're really saying, in other words, is that these institutions, like many others, were set up to enable post war Western military dominance. That's what they're saying. And I suspect, because of that, that they're putting their finger on something else, that these institutions may also have been created as part of that component or hidden system of finance that I believe was put into place after World War II to fund that decades long post war Manhattan sized project. But now, notice in this article, they say one final thing, and this, I believe, is a significant development. It should be noted that the BRICS bloc of emerging economies is expecting all preparatory work for setting up its development bank to be done by July 2014, according to Reuters. That's this year. That's in a couple of months, folks. So, in other words, the BRICS nations are serious. Now, if that comes true, that's something I want us to watch. Because if that comes true, then the next thing we're going to have to watch is how they use that development bank and if they're going to use it in such a fashion to go toe to toe and create competition for the IMF and the World Bank. Now, the second story I want you to pay attention to here is a story by RIA Novosti. This is another Russian news service, and please listen carefully. This, again, is very significant. Um, this is reported May 5th, quote, as a reaction to the Crimea reunifying with Russia in mid-March, the U.S. introduced targeted sanctions against Russian officials and Rosia Bank, considered by the U.S. Treasury to be a private bank for many Russian government officials. Following the move, Visa and MasterCard stopped client operations for cardholders at Rosia Bank, SMP Bank, as well as their subsidiaries Sobin Bank and Invest Capital Bank with no prior notice, causing a serious drop in the consumer confidence of the banks. According to Russian central bank estimates, building the infrastructure will for the launch of the national payment system may take up to 6 months, but, and this is important, President Putin signed the bill. and this is reported on May 5th, signed the bill, which was passed by the Russian State Duma, to create this system. So, in other words, the article goes on to tell us that this is going to take several months, and it's going to take approximately 2 years to get the new cards to everybody. But this is confirmation. It's no more talk. The Russians are going forward with it. Now, stop and consider what this means. They're creating their own development bank, and they're creating a domestic system of clearing utterly free of New York and London of Visa and MasterCard inside of Russia. So the game's afoot. Now, I've been predicting for some time that the BRICS nations would eventually have to start elaborating or setting up their own system of international financial clearing if they are going to successfully bypass the dollar. All right. Now, one step, one signal that this is going to happen would be if they start issuing bonds, either sovereign bonds or corporate bonds, denominated in some currencies other than the dollar. All right. And this was sent to me by a regular reader on the sites, and I want to thank him, Mr. PT, for sending this article because this is a significant story. The article I will link for you. It is simply titled this, quote, Frankfurt issues first bond backed by the Chinese renminbi. Quote, Frankfurt is joining London, Singapore, Hong Kong in the fast-moving market for bonds denominated in the Chinese currency, the renminbi. Germany's KfW Development Bank announced it was issuing a 2-year bond with a volume of 1 billion renminbi at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. The development, this is another key signal here, the development underpins Frankfurt's bid to become a key offshore center for facilitating trade transactions and investments in renminbi. It is also the latest success in Beijing's drive to internationalize its once tightly controlled currency. Now, the article goes on to mention why this is being done, and this, again, is, I think, a very significant development, not only because we have the Frankfurt Bourse now dealing in bonds denominated in renminbi. And folks, I can't tell you how significant that is. Here's why. At the end of the article, it states this. Companies with large business in China can use the currency to help fund expansion. Take automakers selling cars in China. Volkswagen, BMW, and Ford all have financing operations lending renminbi to hungry Chinese customers. So in other words, this is closing the circle now. It's enabling those German companies, and folks, this is going to tie the German economy even more significantly with that of China. Okay, so this means that that circle is now closed. And as renminbi are going to Germany in the form of bonds and then flowing back to China in the form of loans for purchases, as this circle is completed, they're going to have international clearing to do it. All right, and this is going to be something to watch. And it also presages something else very significant. This means that economically, as I've said so many times, economically, Germany's economy is much more plugged into Asia than it is to the American imperialist unipolar system. And this means, again, that we're going to have to watch the long-term trend, not every little wiggle of the needle on the diplomatic dial from Germany, but the long-term trend. Is that needle tilting more towards the east or the west? And I can assure you, the bottom line here, I think, is it's going to tilt more toward the east. Eventually, I think all of these systems, if the United States doesn't change the way it's been doing business in the post 9/11 world, which has been this Bush administration, if you're not for us, you're against us, beat you over the head with the big stick, interfere with the covert operations in governments, and so on and so forth, that the trend is only going to continue. And ultimately, this is a very dangerous thing. The other story that's lying in the background of all of these stories is that Russia conducted major nuclear drills with its military, conducting mass launchings, anti-ballistic missile tests, and so on and so forth. And Russia and China have conducted joint military drills. So what this means, folks, is we're watching a block being put into place, and it's very clear now. The steps are being taken in Germany, they're being taken in Russia with the clearing, and they're taking international steps with their own development bank. The next story, then, the next shoe to drop, in my opinion, that we've got to watch for in the next couple of years is going to be the announcement of an international mechanism of clearing, bypassing SWIFT, bypassing Europe, bypassing the chip system in the United States. This is the next thing to watch for. And if that happens, then that will be the announcement that they are serious. They no longer trust the economic and the foreign policy of the West, and that means particularly the United States. Watch Germany, watch that needle, and then watch what happens in Russia and China with these joint military drills and bilateral currency trading. All right, that's it for my news and views today. And again, I want to thank those folks that sent me articles. I really appreciate all of you doing that. This has been a week. You wouldn't believe the articles I've got in my inbox to go through and sort out and make selections for the blogs for the next week or two. I do want to address that alien DNA creation story because my high octane speculation on that is so harebrained that I don't think I'd better put it out on the air. But anyway, thank you everybody, and God bless. We'll see you on the flip side.